Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars video, and just a quick one today because I'm currently trying to get through a couple of books. I'm reading the one that I'll be talking about today, and also book 2 of the MedStar duology for my conversation on TapCaf Transmissions, my Star Wars Legends book club style podcast, which I'll put on the channel in a couple of days. However, back on topic, today we're talking about Resistance Reborn, the newest Star Wars canon book. I actually get most Del Rey books in advance, so I get to read through them before the book comes out, but I didn't for this one, so I've decided instead just to listen to it on audiobook. So we're only dealing with content from the very beginning of Resistance Reborn, but if you don't want to be spoiled, then I recommend you come back later. By the way, you can listen to the book for free by signing up to Audible at audibletrial.com/EckhartsLadder. There will be a link down in the description. Anyway, Resistance Reborn does a lot of really interesting things for a new canon Star Wars book. The most interesting thing to me is the way that it connects multiple pieces of media. We have references to Star Wars Battlefront 2, books like Bloodline, the Poe comics, and much more. Star Wars Explained did a video which covered much of them quite well. But we also get the reintroduction of Wedge Antilles alongside a character from the Aftermath trilogy, Nora Wexley. Nora is the mother of Snap Wexley, the pilot of Black Squadron from Star Wars Episode 7. Wedge and Nora met around the time of Jakku, but by the sequel trilogy are now married and essentially living on a farm on Akiva. They were both pilots but are now retired. We learn a little bit about Wedge's backstory, primarily that he was heavily involved in training the New Republic's next generation of fighter pilots, including Poe, Snap, and more, although that was fairly obvious. So when we first meet Wedge, he's just starting the day, and sadly enough, I guess, he's thinking about Luke and how the mist sort of reminds him of Luke's stories about Dagobah. Generally, it seems like he hasn't had contact with the Jedi Master for quite some time, sadly. The First Order Blitz has taken much of the galaxy, although not Akiva, which is pretty useless and in the Outer Rim. But Wedge and Nora are expecting an eventual invasion. There are lots of First Order sympathizers, and just generally, both as rebel heroes are in sort of an awkward position. This is made even more awkward when Snap, Nora's son, arrives on the planet with news of what happened on D'Qar and on Crate. Snap wasn't actually at the Battle of Crate, he was off with Black Squadron, however Poe filled him in. He tells Nora and Wedge the hard news, that the Resistance has basically been brought down to the Millennium Falcon and a few starships, and that almost all of the High Command has been killed. Nora is upset, but the only one that truly surprises and shocks Wedge is the death of Admiral ACKBAR. He thought the old Mon Calamari Admiral would have lived forever after surviving Jakku and Endor. However, what truly breaks Wedge is the discovery that Luke has died as well. Wedge swayed. He reached back, gripping the counter. Not Luke. Could he even be killed? Didn't Jedi live forever? Then it's over, he said. The Resistance is over. The First Order has won. However, Snap wasn't just visiting to share the news. He was, at the request of Leia, trying to get both Nora and Wedge to join the Resistance. After the request, both are unsure. They have been living a relatively peaceful and happy life out on the countryside. They've essentially made their own home. They see themselves as survivors and having escaped the war. However, neither, but especially Wedge, I think, can escape the sense of duty. Wedge even feels sometimes guilty for not dying in his starship. He purposefully does not get medical attention because he feels like he's earned his soreness. Wedge and Nora both decide that they'll sleep on it and decide in the morning. However, before going to bed, Wedge decides that regardless of what his wife chooses, he will be going, and he packs a bag and is ready to depart at moment's notice. Nora actually ends up doing the same thing. However, it ends up not even being their choice, because the First Order shows up at their house in the middle of the night, having been tipped off by neighbors. Wedge, his wife, and the 2 pilots of Black Squadron are forced to kill them and incapacitate one of the neighbors who had snitched on them. In the end, Wedge leaves his property with a sense of melancholy, but also a sense of purpose. He paused for a moment, taking in the old house. The place had grown on him. This life had grown on him. He would miss it, but greater things called to him now, and he had never been afraid to answer such calls. Then, later, Wedge knew it was the way of things, but it still stung. He had tried to make a home here, but the truth was, his home was out there in space. It always had been, and now he was headed back once and for all. Wedge is in many ways the same man he was before, but he's much softer. He's grown an attachment to the land and even the animals he's raising. Despite having killed many people before, he feels numb after the combat, and just generally is a little bit overwhelmed. He's an old man at this point. Both him and Nora also think that joining the Resistance will be a suicide mission, but ultimately it's something they feel like they have to do. So a pretty interesting story and nice background to Wedge, and I'm interested to see what happens with him and Nora in the rest of the book. Besides for the ACKBAR and Luke dying part, it kind of reminds me of when Corellia tried to bring Wedge into service during the Second Galactic Civil War from Star Wars Legends, in that it's an old man being called in to serve when he doesn't really want to. In this case though, his allegiances are more cut and dry. So, we're in this, Wedge asked. We're going back to war, back to being rebels, even if it means, it always meant that, hasn't it, she said quietly, eyes intent. And we've lived long lives, longer than many of our friends, Wedge agreed. And Leia needs us. The galaxy needs us, she exhaled. Our children need us. Wedge couldn't argue with that, and something inside him brightened, feeling some of the determination that beamed from Nora's smile. All in all, I think that this book really shows the difference between Star Wars Legends and canon, and you guys might be surprised by this, but I think this actually goes in favor of canon. Legends had an issue where none of the main legacy characters really age in a meaningful way. Han is in his 70s and still fistfighting with Mandalorians. Wedge does get older, but he's always basically the same person. Here, I think we've seen that although the fundamentals of the character are maintained, he has underwent some meaningful change, which I do quite like. However, that's just my opinion. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Also, to me, this really heavily suggests that Wedge will appear in episode 9. I mean, he's also on the front of the cover, so they must have had Dennis Lawson come in for some photographs or something, so I would be very surprised if he's not in the Rise of Skywalker, but I'm also curious to hear what you guys think. That's all I have for today though. Until next time guys, this has been Eckhart's Ladder. Again, you can get this book on Audible. Go to audibletrial.com/EckhartsLadder. And hey, may the Force be with you.